the question that I wanted to ask is, in OPAR, there's a chapter on metaphysics, and Dr. Peikoff draws a really fundamental distinction between what's metaphysically given and what's man-made. And so it might be useful for you to describe what those mean, but my question is, in the context of a human society, when we're surrounded by events and environments that are influenced by human choice, is the best way to think about what's actually metaphysically given that, whatever the circumstances, the law of identity still holds true? So A is A, despite the fact that you're moored in products of human creation.
Who's going to feel that?
Why don't you feel that one?
All right. No.
Helpful.
Is that good?
Thanks.
The best way I know to hold the metaphysically given is her phrase, the nature of nature. So the things that have a nature independent, well, everything has a nature. Some things, natures have been affected by human choices and some things haven't. But even those that have been affected by human choices retain their nature and act according to their nature. So if you build a building, it has a nature. It's man-made. The building is man-made in its origin. But what it's going to do is determined by what it is, by its attributes, its properties. So you cannot flout that. You must obey that to interact with even man-made objects correctly. And I think most important use of the distinction in society is to realize that the man-made is not unalterable. This is as opposed to the phrase, well, we can't do that because it's politically impossible. To be politically impossible means that certain people have made choices that go against it, that won't allow it. But those choices can be changed. They can change them, and you can motivate them to change them. You can give them reasons, or you can mobilize public opinion against them if they're social metaphysical so that they don't respond to reasons. So I think it's really a cash value in today's society is not to take the current conditions established by men as unchangeable, as metaphysically given. They're not.
Do you take that to be different than what I suggested? Because my suggestion was that that's just another way of saying in more applied terms that the law of identity still holds true even in a human society.
No.
That doesn't just apply to rocks and mountains and so forth, but that it applies to all of the things in human society.
But there's a particular fact about the identity of things that's added when we're talking about the metaphysically given versus the man-made. And that's that some of those things' identities are such that they act by choice, or else that they're products of action by somebody by choice. Mm-hmm. And the identities of some other things are such that they're not, and they're inevitably had to be as they are and have to do just what they do. So, I mean, every point about anything could be put as the law of identity holds true, but now we have to add, what are we saying about its identity? And what we're saying about the identity of things when we bring in the metaphysically given versus the man-made is that some are physically given, that is, they are as they are because their nature is independent of anyone's choice, and others are determined through choice. A bibliographic reference on this. So in addition to Opar's treatment and, of course, Ayn Rand's article, The Metaphysically Given versus the Man-Made, there's, I think, a very good section on this in the companion, in the chapter on metaphysics by Jason Ryans. There's a subsection on the metaphysically given versus the man-made. And he talks about the import of it and also about how it applies in some cases where it might be difficult to tell or not obvious. So if you're studying psychology or thinking about your own psychology, what things are metaphysically given and which are man-made. And I think, we can think of, not only does the distinction help you in the cases where it's clear what side of some things fall on once you have the distinction, In other cases, there might be questions where it's hard to determine, but knowing that that's what it's hard to determine about them, is also clarifying.
Okay, so my follow-up question is: so can we use sort of a one example, sort of a concrete example, to apply this, see how it works out? So, one thing that Tyler and I were having trouble figuring out was any given situation. It would seem that there are elements of the man-made and elements of the metaphysically given. So we have a question of how you parse that out and what you call which aspect of the circumstance. So we talked about like a car crash, for instance. And, in a car crash, there's lots of things that influence whether the crash happens. And there seems to be things that are products of human choice and then things that are totally not. And is the right way to think about the car crash that there are different elements of each acting on the situation, or is there just a blanket, can you blanket say this was metaphysically given, this was man-made? I feel like the former, not the latter, is the right way to do it, but I wonder what you think.
Sure, but you have to distinguish fundamentals from derivatives. Let's say one of the drivers is driving drunk. Then the crash is man-made, and he's responsible. What happens in the crash, how the steel crumples, what happens to the bodies is metaphysically given, but the fundamental cause is that he decided to drive drunk.
That's helpful.
And then about that the car is made of steel and it has crumple zones and so forth or whatever is, also man-made. So the whole this event happened is man-made. And then when we start parsing the event into smaller details, we'll find some of the details are metaphysically given and some are man-made. It's metaphysically given that steel of this thickness in this arrangement will crumple this way, but it's man-made that Ford put that steel in this place on the car, and that's why the guy is safe.
That's good. That's helpful. Thanks a lot.